Hey everyone, welcome back to Brian's Mysteries and Adventures on Trail, and I hope everyone's doing well. And today we are going to be talking about a very well-known case, but I think that there's a lot of things that people might not be aware of, and we're going to be discussing the very bizarre disappearance of Park Ranger Paul Fugate. Now, he went missing over 40 years ago, and I did a ton of research on this going back to the 1980s, in 1980 when this first happened, and there is just a ton of news coverage, not necessarily things that you can find on Google, but newspapers.com has digitized over 100 years of various newspaper articles, and a lot of you have asked. That's how I find a lot of my information. In any event, this event occurred around between 2 and 3 p.m. on Sunday, January 13th of 1980. But before that, I want to give you some background on Paul because it's definitely a very, very interesting and somewhat bizarre story. Paul was a very smart man. He studied biology in college. He got his degree in biology in Arlington in 1963. And he kind of wavered in between doing what jobs, but he finally decided on the National Park Service. And then in 1964, roughly 5 months after he started working at the Carlsbad Caverns in New Mexico National Park, he got married to a woman named Dottie. Their time here was apparently nice. I mean, this is a beautiful park. I have not been there personally, but if you look at the pictures, it's got these beautiful caverns and it's just very, very well maintained. It's got gorgeous stalagmites and stalactites, and it was just a very nice place to work, and they enjoyed it. Then roughly a few years later, he was transferred to the Navajo Monument, which is in northern Arizona. And they were stationed there. However, according to documents, and these are quotes by the actual park people, his superintendent was a gentleman named Jack Williams. And in 1967, Williams apparently disciplined Paul for apparently he was being lazy and his personal appearance. Quote, this is a quote by him: "If you want to look and live like a hippie, that is certainly your prerogative, but it's not the prerogative here at the Navajo National Monument." End quote. This Superintendent Williams, was personally annoyed about the National Park Service not being able to fire him. He's quoted in saying, "I do not understand the breed now coming into the National Park Service." However, in 1970, Paul was transferred to the Chiricahua National Monument in Arizona. Now, this is in the southeastern part of the state. And at this time, too, his marriage with Dottie started becoming bizarre, too. Apparently, it became sort of an open relationship, but apparently they were both okay with that. And apparently Paul still had this mustache, which was, I guess at the time, in violation of what the Park Service quoted as saying a violation of their grooming standards. And subsequently in 1971 he was fired, but the National Park Service said that it was, quote, due to his negative personal attitude and his abuse of government equipment, end quote. There was allegations that he apparently stole hay for his wife's horse. Again, this is just what the articles and newspapers said. I'm not saying he actually did this. But it is at this point, him and his wife, they moved to Tucson, where they entered into the University of Arizona for their graduate degrees. However, Paul was on a mission, and he hired several different lawyers. In fact, a civil rights lawyer by the name of Edward Morgan. And he literally spent this next 5 years in this ongoing legal battle with the National Park Service just to get his job back. Now, personally, I don't know if I'd want to go back to work for somebody that I just was in this long legal battle with, but he did. And he actually was finally reinstated into his job at the Chiricahua National Monument in 1976. A little background on the Chiricahua National Park System. It's part of the Chiricahua National Mountains, that, like I said, are in southeastern Arizona, and they have these isolated, what they're called sky islands, and there's these beautiful structures that are some which are over 5,000 feet that rise above the Sonoran Desert, which is beautiful. And this was established in April of 1924, apparently because there was a lot of erosion and it's trying to protect the balancing of these rocks. And this was named after the Chiricahua Apache leader, Cochise, who was the one who was the leader of the war against the U.S. government in the 1800s to protect their land. Basically, this whole area is the remains of a huge volcanic eruption that occurred millions of years ago. And this monument, there's only one 8-mile long road, there's only one campground, and then a various system of trails that most can be hiked in 1 or 2 days depending on your skill level. Paul was a monument naturalist, and he loved to talk to visitors. He loved to answer questions. He curated exhibits, and he also would help put together plans for trails and guides. And he really loved this job. So, I mean, I do understand why he wanted it back so badly. Unfortunately, on this Sunday, January 13, 1980, Paul Fugate, who was only 41 years old at the time, he left the visitor center. He said that he was going to check on some of the nature trails, and that was the last he was ever seen. And bizarrely, he left his radio behind. Being that he was the only permanent staff member on duty that day, he had told the other temporary seasonal staff member that if he wasn't back before 4:30 p.m. to just start shutdown process without him. Earlier in the day, Paul had driven up the seasonal employee up to the Messiah Point trailhead so that she could hike down towards the visitor center. But by 8 p.m., when it grew dark and he still hadn't returned, she obviously became concerned. She contacted the superintendent and they started to look for Paul. But unfortunately, since he hadn't taken his radio, they couldn't contact him that way. The superintendent at the time, a gentleman by the name of Ted Scott, they got together with some other people, the only other staff members that were available, and they went out looking for him that evening, but they couldn't find him. So the morning of January 14th, Mr. Scott contacted the Cochise County Sheriff's Office, which of course got search and rescue team involved. They put together around 24 people on the ground. They had one sniffer dog. And then by January 15th, on Tuesday, the National Guard had a helicopter flying overhead, 16 more volunteers from the Arizona Rescue Association that used the visitor center as their base of operations. And by the following day, the Southern Arizona Search and Rescue Association, the U.S. Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management, and many other agencies were involved in this search, and they were going over these tough ridges, and really, it was just a lot of very hard to see places because of the terrain there. They only got one lead from an acquaintance of Paul, a man by the name of Dick Horton, who said that he described seeing Paul on the afternoon of his disappearance wearing his uniform, and he was slumped unconscious between two men in a pickup truck, which is obviously very disconcerting if this was the case. And the detectives that were working this case really followed up in this lead. They even had this man put under hypnosis, and he described the truck. But it was basically, according to the Park Service director, Jack Davis, saying that he dismissed it because, quote, they would have had to have been going by each other at roughly 50 miles an hour, and it would have been a, quote, fleeting nature of a glimpse. And he just didn't find the validity of it to be prudent. However, others disputed Mr. Davis, saying that when they were working the monument, they reportedly saw a vehicle and spin-out tracks on the dirt road near the fairway and signs of a fight or a scuffle. Then they further searched Mr. Fugate's home, and he had left behind his wallet, all of his cash. He had apparently a valuable collection of weapons, expensive camera equipment. His wife was a professional photographer. He was also restoring a truck that he left behind. This was all very bizarre if he did leave on his own accord, which all of these facts and evidence put together discounted that theory. So most people were under the impression that he did not leave on his own accord and that something either bad happened to him, or he had an accident, or he was in fact abducted. And the official search lasted over 2 weeks. But then after that, various groups of volunteers have spent years looking for Paul. Over the years, there's been various sightings. He was reportedly sighted in 1983 in Bend, Oregon, and then a big thing happened in July of 1983. Based on the Cochise County Sheriff's Office, they announced that Fugate had been murdered and the arrest of, quote, more than one person was imminent, but that never happened. No one was ever arrested. No one was ever charged. So it's unknown where they came up with that or what that theory was even based on. Prior to this, the National Park Service had declared Paul was officially missing. They posted a $5,000 reward, which was matched by his family. But in 1981, Howard Chapman, the director of the Park Service Western Region, had thoroughly reviewed the case, and he quoted in saying that Paul had voluntarily abandoned his position and he was dismissed from his role. Further, his wife Dottie was asked to return the money, which was around $7,000 that had been paid to her, plus 11% interest. This money had been paid to her as partial salary because, he was missing and feared that endangered, and they later demanded this repayment, based on their theory that Mr. Fugate had voluntarily abandoned his post. And they then later they told Dottie that the money could be taken out of his retirement fund, but she was also told that she could not appeal because a termination hearing had to be requested within 20 days of the dismissal. I mean, there was just so much political stuff in dispute, and this poor woman went through so much, not only losing her husband, but basically for 6 years the national park system refused to list him as deceased. His widow was unable to collect any benefits. Then in 1986, the National Park Service and an Arizona investigator re-examined the whole case, and believe me, there is tons of information, and they just came to the conclusion that he was dead. So Dottie was finally able to claim the full financial support, but it was 6 years later, and this is still an ongoing investigation. Like I said, there's been many theories. Apparently at the time, there was a lot of illegal drug activity apparently in that area. And even as far back as 2014, there was incidences of drug activity and violence towards some visitors. So it's possible that he did run into some trouble that way. But again, it's all unknown. And the case was then again reopened in 2018, and people are still looking into what happened to him because it's never been resolved. But according to the National Park Service in 2018, they announced that they had discovered new information about the Fugates case, and together with the Cochise County Sheriff's Department has been asking help from the public for clues or information. They also announced that it was increasing the award from $20,000 to $60,000. So obviously they have something, they know something, and they're still looking into this. So that leads me to believe that this case is most likely foul play or someone else that he knew was involved, because they're really pushing hard to figure this out. And I really hope that they do, because to this day, there's absolutely no evidence that they've found. There's been no evidence of anything on the mountains, none of his clothes, none of his uniforms, no remains, nothing. Sadly, even people have accused his wife of being involved because she apparently didn't go up to the monument until 4 days after. But what a lot of people don't realize is that Paul only visited her every other week or so. She was living in Tucson the entire time that he was working at this national park, and she never came up to the monument. So that to me doesn't really say anything at all. But a lot of people say that because her house was never searched, and because Paul was apparently seeing other women and he maybe had gotten another woman pregnant, you know how these things go. There's always all this gossip, but I don't personally believe that. And I know that there are a lot of authorities, including the Cochise County Sheriff's Office, despite everything that's happened in the past, they're really working hard to solve this case and bring Paul home. There is a tip line set up, which I'll have all that information in the description. At the time, like I said, he was 41 years old, around 5'8", 5'9", about 160 to 170 pounds. He was wearing a gray National Park Service uniform shirt with patches and a badge, and a bright green National Park Service uniform jacket with a red lining, jockey shorts, white socks, and green work boots. He's a Caucasian male, graying brown hair, blue eyes. His hair was long at the time of his disappearance. He had a full beard and mustache. He had a pronounced widow peak at the time and wore what we now would call frameless or rimless glasses. If you have any information, I'll have the number and website link in the description where you can submit a tip either anonymously or use your name if you know anything, or have any information that you feel is relevant to this case. One thing that does stick out to me is that apparently Paul Fugate is one of the only park rangers to have disappeared and have never been found or reappeared, or they've never found his remains. He's one of the only ones, at least that I could find. If you know of another one, please correct me, but I thought that was unbelievable. So my thoughts and prayers go out to him, his family, his wife, everyone who knew him and knew him at the time, and just hoping that one day soon he can be brought home and either given a proper burial, or if he's still alive, reunited with his friends and family. Thank you all for watching as always, and please leave me some feedback. Let me know what you think about this case or you think happened. Special thank you to co.ag for providing the background music, and I will see everybody in the next one. Take care. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking with me to the end. I just wanted to say real quick, a lot of people have asked me where I get the newspaper clippings, and like I've said in some of the videos, I have a subscription to newspapers.com, which is awesome because it's just a yearly subscription, and they've digitized newspapers from all over the world for the last 100 years, so it's a great way to go in and do further research if that's something that you're interested in. In any event, I look forward to your comments. Thank you for watching, and I hope everyone is having a great week.